Now, we will come towards phases of inquiry based learning. Let us discuss phases and sub-phases of inquiry based learning. First phase of inquiry based learning is orientation phase. Inquiry begins with this phase, which has its main aim to stimulate curiosity about a topic and provide students with opportunities to define a problem statement. After orientation phase, second phase of inquiry based learning is conceptualization phase. In this phase, research questions and hypotheses are stated. In this phase, teacher need to encourage students to define questions and hypotheses. There are two sub-phases of conceptualization phase, that is questioning sub-phase and hypothesis generation sub-phase. In questioning sub-phase, if learner have little or no background concerning the scientific topic chosen, then should start with this sub-phase. In hypothesis generation sub-phase, after acquiring experience on the topic, students can move on to the hypothesis generation sub-phase. Alternatively, students who are familiar with the topic can move directly to the hypothesis generation sub-phase, skipping the questioning sub-phase and formulate hypothesis. Third phase of inquiry based learning is investigation phase. This phase is mostly based on the hands-on activities. It is a process of gathering empirical evidence to answer the research question or hypothesis that was formulated during the previous phase. In this phase, role of teacher is to monitor and assist students when and where it is needed. There are again three sub-phases that fall under the phase of investigation, which are exploration sub-phase, experimentation sub-phase, and third is data interpretation sub-phase. First, know about the exploration sub-phase. Exploration sub-phase is the process of systematic and planned data generation on the basis of a research question. In this sub-phase, you as teachers urge students to plan and generate data relevant to the research question. Second sub-phase of investigation is experimentation. Experimentation sub-phase is the process of designing and conducting an experiment in order to test a hypothesis. During this sub-phase, it is time for students to gain hands-on experience by conducting their scientific experiment. Third sub-phase of investigation is data interpretation sub-phase. Data interpretation sub-phase is the process of making meaning out of collected data and synthesizing new knowledge. Lastly, after having collected the data needed, students need to understand its meaning and gain new knowledge that is based on their experience. Fourth phase of inquiry based learning is conclusion phase. In this phase, research findings from the investigation phase are reported. In this phase, teacher's role is to encourage students to communicate with their peers to present their findings. After conclusion phase, fifth phase of inquiry based learning is discussion phase. This phase is directly connected to all the previous ones. It consists of communicating findings and reflecting on the processes. There are two sub-phases that fall under this category, that are communication sub-phase and reflection sub-phase. Communication sub-phase generates support for scientific research or study, or to inform decision making including political and ethical thinking, where reflection surface aims to raise students' skills in developing creative scientific problem solving and socio-scientific decision making abilities. This was the explanation about the phases and sub-phases of inquiry based learning. Now, let us explore about which skills and practices are involved during inquiry based learning. We go according to the phases. Orientation phase involves exploring the topic, stating the problem and identifying the variables. The inquiry learning process starts with the orientation phase, during which pupils develop an idea about the topic which is introduced by the environment, given by the teacher or defined by himself or herself. Students' interest and curiosity for this topic is stimulated. They become more acquainted with the topic and the main variables are identified. The outcome of this phase is a problem statement which gives direction for the next phases. Skills that need to be developed or stimulated with your pupils are curiosity, ability to explore a topic, to state problems and to identify variables that matter in their investigation. Conceptualization phase involves raising questions, constructing hypotheses and making a research plan. During the conceptualization phase, pupils should be provided with the opportunity to determine the key concept that will be studied during the inquiry process, driven by either questioning or hypothesis. A pupil with less experience with the topic will first formulate questions based on the problem statement before moving on to hypothesis. Both of these should be based on theoretical justification and contain independent and dependent variables. Pupils or the students learn to raise research questions and identify testable hypotheses. They also learn and practice to make a research plan for their investigation necessary for answering the research questions or test the hypothesis. The outcomes of the conceptualization phase are the research questions or hypotheses to be investigated and the research plan to answer these questions or the hypothesis. Investigation phase involves collection of data, analysis of data, formulation of findings and monitoring them. The investigation phase follows the conceptualization phase and is the phase where curiosity is turned into action in order to respond to the stated research questions or hypotheses. The first step is to collect data to find answers to the research questions or hypothesis. Learner then move to data analysis by organizing and interpreting their data. During the process of collecting and analyzing, it is important that learner have the skills to systematically collect data, follow and monitor their research plan and make well-founded changes in this plan if necessary. Students learn to search for relevant information, systematically collect relevant data and organize their data in order to help them answer their research questions or test their hypothesis. During the data analysis, students learn to derive meaning out of their collected data and organize data and to compare and contrast their findings against each other as well as against others' findings. Gradually, they learn to synthesize findings and recognize patterns in their data that can be formulated into the findings. Conclusion phase involves drawing conclusions to relate findings and evaluation of the investigation. In the conclusion phase, the outcomes of the investigation phase are transformed into the main findings of the inquiry process. By relating those findings to their research questions or hypotheses, students learn to decide what these conclusions actually mean. During the conclusion phase, students will learn the ability to infer the answers to their research questions or arguments for rejecting or supporting their hypothesis from their collected data. After reaching conclusions and identifying an answer to the research question or the hypothesis, the entire inquiry process is critically evaluated in order to determine the solidness of the research findings. That is your primary role as the teacher in the conclusion phase, to teach students how to evaluate their findings and how to determine their solidness. On the one hand, the discussion phase can be seen as an ongoing process related to all other inquiry phases involving communication phase about and reflection and discussion on the process and outcomes of the inquiry process along the way. On the other hand, when the actual inquiry process is finished, it is time to communicate to a wider audience on the relevance, consequences and the ethics of those findings. In this last phase, therefore, special interest is paid to students learning to reflect on, communicate and discuss their inquiry activities and findings to peers, teachers and society. For the purpose of communication, pupils learn to share research findings by articulating their own understanding of the research answers or hypotheses. They also learn to listen to others sharing their findings or commenting on their own. To communicate well, students must be able to reflect on the inquiry process and point out the relevance, consequences and ethical issues related to it.